The Compromise of 1850 is the solution, and I'm using air quotes there, the solution to some of the problems that emerge with the settlement of the Mexican War. Remember, the Mexican War is resolved by the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, where the United States pays $15 million in cash to Mexico to receive 500,000 square miles. It increases the size of the United States by more than 20%. We gain New Mexico, California. This is a huge chunk of land. It significantly gives us the valuable ports of San Diego and San Francisco. And by 1853, with the Gadsden Purchase, that little brown area in southern Arizona, another part that we bought off of Mexico, really the continental United States looks like it does today. The Gadsden Purchase was purchased for a southern railroad. But what are we going to do with this land is the big question that many Americans are asking, specifically slave or free. I'll come back to that in a moment. The other question, which we'll visit later as well, what about those Mexican residents in those territories? Well, it was decided under the treaty that those Mexican residents, those people of Mexican descent, Mexican citizens, would become U.S. citizens if they stayed on that land. However, they soon become second-class citizens. It's very similar to the way African Americans are treated in the South after the Civil War. They don't have the same legal rights, they don't have the same land rights, and they're really treated as second-class citizens. So some historians have asked, why not all of Mexico? Did Americans just want the ports? Did America just want to go to war with Mexico, but not all of that land? Well, racism plays a big role in not taking more of Mexico. Many Americans at this time, after the Mexican War, did not want to rule over an entire country of people of Spanish and Indian descent. This would have been also like ruling a colony. And by the mid-1800s, the United States is not morally comfortable with having colonies of our own. That's probably too close to the American experience under Britain. However, by the end of the 1800s, enough people are okay with that will happen overseas. There's also a big question that many Americans are asking after the Mexican War, and that is, does our government favor slavery? Remember, James K. Polk from Tennessee, a slave-owning state, had been willing to fight with Mexico to keep all of Texas, which is definitely going to be a slave state. But when it came to Oregon and the Oregon Territory, which is north of any slave territory, which would definitely be free territory, what did Polk do? Well, Polk was willing to compromise with Britain and only take half. So, is this sending this seems to send a message to some Americans that maybe the federal government is more supportive of slavery. Well, to get to the Compromise of 1850, we first got to go back in time. So let's jump in our DeLoreans, get it up to 88 miles per hour, and let's go all the way back to the Constitutional Convention. Now remember, the founders had only made plans to tentatively end the slave trade. And some historians have speculated that people like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and other framers of the Constitution had really hoped that slavery would die out on its own. Remember, the Constitution was ratified before the cotton gin was invented, before cotton had spread across all of the South. So some people see the Constitution not really as anti-slavery. Some people even see it as pro-slavery. The famous abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison famously burned a copy of the Constitution in protest. In the North, most Northerners disliked slavery, and they really disliked the Southern aristocrats, those wealthy, sweet tea drinking Southern planters. But that doesn't mean that they love black people. Northerners are also racist towards African Americans. They're not willing to accept African Americans as equal citizens. And they hold a really high respect for the Constitution. It's in this vein that the Missouri Compromise in 1820 was settled. Missouri wanted to enter the state as a slave state. However, it's pretty far north. Remember, the Northwest Ordinance had banned slavery north of the Ohio River, but the Ohio River stops at the Mississippi River. So Missouri says, we want to come in as a slave state, and we're not in violation if we do so. That would have upset the balance of slave and free states in the Senate. So a compromise was reached, whereas Missouri entered the Union as a slave state, but at the same time, Maine was accepted to the Union as a free state to maintain that balance. And moving forward, after 1820, the southern border of Missouri, 36 degrees north, 30 minutes, will be the boundary of slave territory. Any land above 3630 that the United States should settle in the future is going to be free. Anything south of that line could be slave. That was the agreement reached with the Missouri Compromise. Remember, Congress is in charge of admitting new states, and the Missouri Compromise sets this precedent for deciding whether or not it's going to be slave or free. And the vast majority of the land acquired in the Mexican Cession is south of that line. It's that big orange area on our map there. So what is the country going to do moving forward? The first person to address this issue in Congress is David Wilmot, a congressman from Pennsylvania. Wilmot proposes a ban on slavery in all land taken from Mexico, whether it be north or south of that border that had been established with the Missouri Compromise. A ban on all slavery. And remember, like we were just saying, some northern expansionists had really felt betrayed by the Polk administration. After all, he had been willing to go to war in what will be the bloodiest in terms of American fatalities, the bloodiest war in American history for all of Texas, slave territory, but had compromised and taken only half of the free Oregon territory. However, David Wilmot should not be getting a Nobel Prize. He also wanted to ban free African Americans from moving to land taken from Mexico so that he can get the support of racists in the North and the South. He does not want African Americans competing with white farmers in that new territory. Wilmot's proviso passed through the House, where there were more Northerners, but it was stopped in the Senate, where Southerners enjoyed a greater balance of power between the North and the South.